Friends, hi, namaskar, and a very warm welcome. Today, we are still in the second decade of the 20th century, and today I am going to talk about the main event that happened in that particular century. So, I request you all to sit back and relax while I tell about the First World War. First World War was fought in Europe between 1914 to 1918. Why it was called the First World War? Because of its dimension, because of its casualties, because of the number of countries who participated in that war, as well as the number of casualties in that particular war. In a later decade, a war of even greater magnitude took place. So, this was the First World War. Let us see which are the countries which were involved in the First World War. To understand that, if we look at a map of Europe in the early 1910s, what do we see? In the western part of Europe are countries like the Netherlands, Belgium, France and Great Britain, while in the eastern part are the two great empires, the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. While the western countries have their colonies in Africa and Asia, and the two empires in the east are having vast areas under their control, there are two more empires you will find in the central part of Europe. These are the Austro-Hungarian Empire and a relatively new empire, the German Empire. France, which shares a common boundary with the German Empire, is the sworn bitter enemy of the German Empire. These two empires, being in the central part of Europe, are feeling a bit bogged down and they want to increase their colonies. So what do? They look at the low-hanging fruits, the countries which have gained their independence from the Ottoman empires. And at this point of time, across the Atlantic is the United States of America, which is neutral, but it is definitely pro-Western countries of Europe. Every war needs a trigger. For this particular war, what was the trigger? Well, it was an assassination. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, who was also the crown prince and successor to the Austrian throne, went on an official visit to Sarajevo, the capital of Serbia, in June 1914. On 23rd June 1914, he was assassinated by members of Black Hand, which is a secret terrorist organization of Serbia. After the assassination, Austria had given an ultimatum to Serbia, and since the response of Serbia did not satisfy the Austrians, they declared war on Serbia in July 1914. The German Empire, led by Kaiser Wilhelm II, immediately came and declared war in support of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. On the other side, both Britain and France have also come into the war to support the Serbians. Like this, what we find is, on one side, which is known as the Allied side, are the Western European countries, Britain, France, Belgium, and Holland, and their colonial armies, which include the Indian troops fighting on behalf of the British, and the African troops fighting on behalf of the French, and other colonial troops like the New Zealanders and the Australians, who are fighting on the side of the Allies. The other side is the Central Forces. In this side is the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Bulgarians, and later on the Romanians are also joined in, while the Eastern empires also take sides. Russia sides up with the Allied forces, while the Ottomans are teamed up with the Central Forces. Meanwhile, America remains neutral, and they are very clear: as long as there is no total war and the American ships are not attacked by the German or the Central Forces Navy, they will not participate in the war. So what happens? In 1914, the Germans move fast and gets into the French territory. There in French territory, what happens? The two armies face each other in trenches, and in this particular war, there were a lot of new weapons that were used, like the tanks, the aircrafts, and even poison gas. But since the armies face each other in the trenches with only the no man's land lying in between them, it is a sort of a stalemate, and even though there was heavy fighting, there is no significant breakthrough. 1914 moves on to 1915, and still neither side could make any positive breakthrough. There were many battles, and obscure places in France become famous overnight, like Verdun, Somme, Marne, Flanders, etc., because of the battles as well as the huge casualties. In the Eastern Front, the war is being fought in the Russian borders. 1915 also goes, and by the middle of 1916, both the sides are at their wits' end. All the conventional forms of war and planning have failed, and Britain has become nearly bankrupt, while the German Empire, though not in that position, are actually looking to find out what is to be done, because they don't have any definite strategy to make the final attack and defeat the Allied forces. In the meantime, the Allied forces are blockading the German ships, and the US continues to supply provisions to the Allies. In the later part of 1916, when all the conventional methods of war have failed, both sides think of US intervention to make a peace treaty and end the war at that point of time. But however, at that time, certain things happened to all the countries internally. In Great Britain, Prime Minister Asquith is changed, and David Lloyd George comes in as the new Prime Minister, while in France, Georges Clemenceau becomes the new President of the French Republic. In Germany also there is a change in leadership, and the civilian chancellor is replaced by General Erich von Ludendorff, a military man who from now on will take decisions on the day-to-day war activities. The British and French leaders are of the opinion that they want to go for the final victory, and they want to continue the war till the final victory comes. At this point of time, the opportunity to negotiate is lost. It is not that the American president Woodrow Wilson, had he negotiated, the war would have come to an end, but this internal change in leadership killed that possibility once and for all. So by 1917, Erich von Ludendorff takes the decision for total war because other strategies of the German Empire have failed, and he starts attacking the US provision ships. This brings US into the war, and in April 1917, USA declares war on the German Empire and the Central Forces. And this was the first time that USA was directly involved in any European war. It was not that the Americans had a huge army, but their direct involvement in the war actually boosted the morale of the Allied forces. But again, by the end of 1917, after the October Revolution in Russia, the communist regime decides to withdraw from the war, and they do so by signing a treaty to that effect. So the position that all the countries were in at the beginning of 1917 is again almost restored. So the war spills on to 1918, and by middle of 1918, the German High Command decides to go for an all-out attack and make a breakthrough and defeat the Allied forces once and for all. So they go out for the all-out attack, and somehow the Allies hold on, and that attack is repelled. This failure to break through completely breaks down the morale of the Germans, and by November 1918, Germany surrenders and the war is won by the Allies, thus drawing an end to the 4-year-long conflict, which had left in its wake 2 crore dead and wounded. It is said that the entire generation of European youth died in the trenches. After the war, Germany signs a humiliating treaty near Paris called Treaty of Versailles, and the countries of Europe are reconstituted. There is a new country that is formed from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it is converted into 3 countries: Austria, Hungary and Czechoslovakia, and the Balkan countries are made into a single country called Yugoslavia. So if one looks at the map of the 1920s, they will see these 2 new countries. While these 2 countries are no longer there, but at that point of time they were the newly reconstituted countries. President Woodrow Wilson formed the League of Nations in 1919. What was the purpose? Its purpose was to ensure that conflicts of these dimensions in future would not happen. But did it happen that way? Well, amongst the survivors who were trudging back to Austria and Germany at this point of time was a 29-year-old corporal called Adolf Hitler, and he would have been the right person to answer that question had it been asked to him. Did anything good at all happen out of this 4-year-long conflict? I would say yes. There was a lot of research and development in the aviation field. Remember that only about 10-12 years back, man was able to fly a heavier than air machine in the air, and within that span of 10-12 years, these aeroplanes are participating in the war. Again, in the field of medical science, lot of developments took place due to the treatment made by the doctors to so many wounded, and there was lot of advancement, particularly in the field of surgery. Apart from sending the troops, did India have any other role in the First World War? Well, yes. Going by the maxim that your enemy's enemy is your friend, the Indian revolutionaries led by Jyotirindra Mukherjee contacted the German consulate in India and requested for a consignment of arms for fighting the British in the Indian soil. The Germans obliged, and a consignment of Mauser machine pistols was sent to India and it was brought by a German warship and delivered in the coast of Odisha near Baleswar in Bay of Bengal. Jyotirindra Mukherjee and 4 of his colleagues went to Baleswar to retrieve the consignment, but somehow the Britishers have also got the information, and in the pitched gun battle that took place, Jyotirindra Mukherjee became a martyr. So how did the world shape up after the First World War? And how did the events take place? That is the story for the next time. So I would thank you all and would definitely see you all in the next time. Namaskar. And before going, I would like to request you for one thing. See, now with the COVID second wave in India, I would urge all of you to take the vaccine as quickly as possible. Of course, the people who are below 45 will not be able to take it at this point of time, but as soon as you are eligible, please take that vaccine. Thank you.